Boker Tov. Today's Daf Yomi is Bava Basra Daf Kuf Chav Zayin 127. Today's Daf is dedicated for Shmira for the Chayalim, that's all for the Shvuyim and the Yeshua for Am Yisrael in the days Tzara. Daf Yomi has told us on the previous Daf that if a person was a tumtum, i.e., his genitalia was covered up, we didn't know if it was a male or a female, and then later in life, his membrane that covered his genitalia was uncovered, then there are certain laws that don't apply to him as a male, even though we now know he's a male. And so therefore the law of Ben Sorera Morad doesn't apply, a rebellious child doesn't apply, and also the law of a double inheritance. He's not, if he would have been born first, he does not get a double portion. In both cases, you need to be a male from day one. So now on the top of 127a, a Maimer tells us not only do you only inherit if you are a boy from birth and not a tumtum, but also af eno mimayit chelak bebechora. The tumtum is only counted unless it was a male from birth. He's only going to be counted from once they start dividing it up after the firstborn's double portion is given. Meaning to say, the Rashbam's example is, let's say there's 9 fields, and so there's 2 brothers plus the tumtum. So the first thing that happens is that you divide up the firstborn share amongst him and the brother who's not a tumtum. So therefore you divide into 3 equal portions of 3 fields each. And the firstborn takes his 3 fields. And then you put the tumtum into the equation. And so now you have 6 fields divided by 3, and each one gets 2. So the firstborn ends up with 5 fields, and everybody else gets 2. As it states, V'yolda lo banim, which means Achia ben b'shas leida. He needs to be a son from the moment of birth in order to say that he is memayit b'bechora. He limits the firstborn's double portion. Rav Shizvi says, Rav Shizvi Amar af enonimo l'shmona. He also doesn't override the Shabbos to get his bris on the 8th day, and this based upon the fact the Amar Kra Isha ki tazriya v'yalda zachar uvayom hashmini yimol. It means to say a woman who conceives and gives birth to a male. On the 8th day, he shall be circumcised, which means needs to be born a boy from the moment of birth to override the Shabbos for a bris. Whereas Rav Sharvia says, Af ein imo tameya leida. Rav Sharvia says, also his mother is not going to become tumas leida. She's not going to become tameya from giving birth. So we're going to review these laws. Biblically speaking, a woman who gives birth is tamei. That's called, biblically speaking, that blood is tumas leida, from birth. For a male, it's for the first 7 days, and female, it's the first 14 days. Then biblically speaking, the next period of time is called dam toar. Even if she has blood, it's not considered tameah, and so therefore that blood is pure. She's not ritually impure. That's the next 33 days for a boy, or 66 days for a girl, and then she's mechusar kippurim. She has to go to the Beis Hamikdash to bring a korban. Rabbinically, she's going to be tamei from all blood. So now Rav Sharvia says, Af ein imo tamei leida, that if she gives birth to a boy who's not yet a boy, he's a tumtum, and then his membrane is torn, and we see as a boy, she doesn't have the tumas leida, not of 7 days, as though she would be given birth to a girl, and also not for 14 days if you discover her to be a female, because it says the yalda zachar, and also the imnikeva. So therefore, she's not going to be tamei for 7 days. She didn't give birth to a boy. It needs to be a zachar mishas leida. So Rav Shizvi says it doesn't override the bris. Rav Sharvia says she doesn't become dam tumas leida. So the Gemara says, Meitzvei, we're going to challenge the position of Rav Shavio say she doesn't become tumas leda. It says hamapelas tum androgynous. Teishev was her own akeva. If a woman has a miscarriage, Rahmana litzlan, and she gives birth to either a tum, the tumtum is the one whose membrane is covered up, or an androgynous who has both male and female genitalia. So under those circumstances, she is going to have to sit as she is tmeya for both a male and a female, meaning she has the stringencies of both, and so she has to have the 14 days, and then she's mechusar kippurim until she brings the korban after 66 days. And also, she's going to assume that the blood toar doesn't, that we're going to assume that the blood tohar doesn't start after 7 days, which it would do for a male, but has to wait until after the 14 days of a female. So Tiyufta de Rav Sharvia, Tiyufta, this is in fact the reputation of Rav Sharvia, because he says that Tumtum, the mother, is not Tmei Aleda. And here we're saying she is. So it's a direct refutation. Tiyufta de Rav Sharvia, Tiyufta. So the Gemara says, well, let's say it's also a refutation. Tiyufta de Rav Shizvi. Maybe this is also a Tiyufta de Rav Shizvi. Why? Because he also expounds until she is born from, until he's born from the time of birth, a male. And so therefore, that's the way it was described by the pasuk of Rav Shavia by Tumas Leda. And he does the same exposition of the verse by the Milah, whereas this Tana says he's going to be considered a male from birth with respect to Tumas Leda, because it says Teshev was Zachar or Nekeva. So therefore, why don't we say it's also a refutation of Rav Shizvi? So the Gemara says, Tana sipuke misafki le'ulachumra. No, the Tana is not 100% certain that he's a male. He's just saying we're going to be strict. But to be strict, we're not going to override the Shabbos prohibition. And so therefore, it's not a refutation against Rav Shizvi. So the Gemara says, no, ihachi. If that's the case, it should have said Teshev was Zachar u'nekeva u'nida mibayle. It should say, well, if we're not sure, she should also have the stringencies. It should have said she's for male, which is 7 days, and then 33 of Dam Tohar, 14 days for a female, and also Nida, which case there's no Dam Tohar. Biblically speaking, the blood after 7 days for a male and 14 days for a female is not Tameh. Well, if that's the case, if we're just being strict, it should have said Ulanida, and she sits as though it was menstrual blood. That's what it should have said. It would have been strict all the way around. So Amara, so Kasha. The Gemara says it's difficult to eat because some want to say that Reb Shizvi might just have had a girsa text of that Mishnah that adds in the word nida. Amarava Tanya Kavasi de Ravami. So we had started by saying that there is a position that the Ben Sar or Mora does not beget, that the tumtum shenikra v'nimtza zachar, the tumtum whose membrane is torn, is discovered to be a male, does not get a double portion. That was the position of Rabbi Ami. So we have a brayso that supports him. Ben v'lo tumtum. If he's a son, he collects the double portion, but not if he's a tumtum. Bachor, if he's a firstborn, v'lo suffix, but not if he's a doubt. If he's a firstborn, he collects a double portion, but not if he's a doubt. What does that mean? Bishlam ben v'lo tumtum. I understand when it says son and not a tumtum. That's like the statement Kid Rabbi Ami. That means to say there's a tumtum shenikra v'nimtza zachar. He doesn't collect the double portion. But what does it mean? Bachor v'lo suffix. Firstborn collects, but not if he's a doubt. Lafuke, what case is it excluding? So the Gemara says, "Lafuke mididarash Rava." Oh, this brayso is not consistent with the position of Rava, which Rava is going to have a big problem with this. The darash Rava shtei nashim sheyaldu bezicharim b'machbeh. Let's say Rava got up and gave a big drasha in the yeshiva. He said 2 women who give birth to 2 males in a cave. Kosfin harsha, that was that. So they could write a harsha for each other. What does that mean? Meaning, say they write, I give you the permission to go and claim the double portion. If you say, I give my rights to you, and then and then one of them could go and ask for the portion of the firstborn from the other brothers. He says, if I'm the firstborn, give it to me, and if not, give it to me, my brother, because he gave me his portion. And so therefore, So so that's what he's saying, that Bechor v'lo suffix. So the Bryce is saying you can't do that. That you have to know clearly who the firstborn is. You can't use this concept of Arsha to narrow down the case and prove that this person is one of two possible firstborns. So that's what the Brisa said, but Rava said that they could do that. So it's contradicting to the Brisa. So Rav Papa said, "Amay Rav Papa or Rava v'ashach Ravan davar zeh shalti kol Rabosei v'lo armelu davar baram kach amru mishum Rabbi Yanai." So Rav Papa said to Rava, but this matter, Ravan said, I asked all my teachers, and they didn't say anything except they said the following: Mishum Rabbi Yanai, Ukru v'sofnis arvu kosvin arsha. When can you do arsha? If they first knew each other and then they just forgot. There was clear indication of who the firstborn was at birth, but then they got mixed up. Then they can write the arsha for each other. But lo hukru, but if they never knew, ain't kosvin arsha, and you can't do arsha. You need to know for sure who the firstborn is. Hadaruki Rava Morale. So Rava, when he heard that he was wrong, he got up the darash and he expounded and he said, "Dvarim shamarti lachem, the things that I said to you, Tau same biyadi, they're a big mistake. Baram kach amru mishum Rabbi Yanai. This is what they said in Rabbi Yanai. Hukro besof nisarvu, kosven arsha zelazeh, hukro and kosven arsha zelazeh. You can only do this concept of arsha if they knew for sure who was the firstborn, but if they never knew for sure was the firstborn, they cannot do it. They cannot do it. So, okay. The Gemara says, Shochu b'nei Akra de Agma Shmuel. So the b'nei Akra de Agma, so it's this village that stood on the swamp, they sent a message to Shmuel, Yilamdeinu Rabbeinu, teach us, Hayu muchzakin b'zeh shu b'chor. So the community knew that this guy was the firstborn. He had the presumed status of being the firstborn. V'amar aviv al acher b'chorhu. And his father comes along and says, "No, that's not my firstborn. Somebody else is the firstborn." Ma'u shalchuhu. So what's the law? So Shmuel sent back to them, Kosvin or Shazal. He says, "Okay, this is the case of Hukru Besof Nisarvu." And so what they're allowed to do is they're allowed to write our shah for each other. So that they can write the arashah for each other under these circumstances, and they could both go to the other brothers and say, we split the firstborn double portion. So the Gemara says, wait, this connects to another dispute between the Rabbanon and Rabbi Yehuda, whether or not in the case of a chazaka, and someone is the firstborn, we believe the father. And this ruling of Shmuel is not consistent with either the Rabbanon's position or Rabbi Yehuda's position. Where it says, Manav Shach, Ika Rabbanon Sfirway, Lishlachul Rabbanon. If he holds like the Rabbanon, then he should say, I rule like the Rabbanon. And if he holds like the Rabbi Yehuda, we'll see that his position in a moment. Then Lishlachul Rabbi Yehuda, he should say, I rule like Rabbi Yehuda. So which is it? Does he believe the father? Does he believe the chazaka, the presumed status? Mara says Mesafkiwe, so no, it's a question. Ika Rabbi Yehuda, Ika Rabbanan. It's a question whether he holds like Rabbi Yehuda or the Rabbanan. So that therefore, since he wasn't sure, he said that they could do this Arsha. So Gemara says, what is this dispute between Rabbi Yehuda and the Rabbanan? The Tanya, because we're going to the Brisa. It says in the pasuk that the Bechor ben Asnua Yakir Oseslo Pishnaim, the father knows the son of the hated one to give him a double portion, but it says Yakir, Yakirenu Achirim. So that means, this is the position of Rabbi Yehuda, that the father can be the one to tell us who the firstborn is. A person is believed to say, this is my firstborn son. And so we don't believe, according to Rabbi Yehuda, we don't follow the chazaka, we follow the father. And just like he's believed to say, this is my firstborn. He's also believed to disqualify his son from being a Kohen and say that he's a disqualified Kohen, i.e. a halal, because the father married who was a Kohen, married a divorcee or a chalutza. So the father is believed to say whose son, which one is the firstborn. His father is believed to also say he's a disqualified Kohen. The Chum say no, we believe the Chazaka and not the father. I understand Rabbi Yehuda who says the father is believed. I know they'll say Yakir. He darshans it out from the word Yakir. El Rabbanon. But according to the Rabbanon, Yakir Lamale. What are the Rabbanon who say the Chazak is believed? What does he do with the word Yakir? He says Bitzarech Hekera. So he says, no, I'll tell you what we do with the word Hakir. If there's nobody else who's muhsak as the firstborn, that's when we can follow the father. That's what it means. So therefore, since there's nobody believed, then we'll follow the father. But if there's a chazaka, we don't follow the father. So Gemara says, "Amai helchasa." The Gemara says, "I don't understand." Gemara is challenging the Rabbanan who say that this circumstance, why do we need Yakir in the case where we need the Hakir? So the Gemara's question, he says, it makes sense to Rabbi Yehuda that the pasuk is telling us that the father is believed in case of chazaka, because we might have thought we follow the chazaka and we give him a double portion to the muhsak, but that we might have thought that. So we say no, we believe the father, and we don't say that we need a pasuk there. Why? Because he's a muhsak. So since he's muhsak as a firstborn, we don't say, oh, why would the father have lied? Because we don't say lamalu shakar b'makom edim. But according to the Rabbanon, where there is no case of chazaka, why do we need a pasuk? Since the father has a migu, he could have anyways given the gift away to the son while he was alive. If he wanted to give him a double portion, he would be able to. So why does he need a pasuk? We believe somebody through migu. Because even if this person was just a regular person, he could give him as a gift a double portion. So the Gemara says, to give him a double portion. Why? Well, yeah, if this guy would not have even been his firstborn, he could have given him a double portion. And so therefore, why do we need the Chachamim need a pasuk of Yakir in this case? Where it says, no, we're talking about a case. Why do we need it? We're talking about a person who got the assets. How do we deal with assets that he gets while he's a goses? There's a fundamental difference between a shlivmera and a goses. A shlivmera is somebody who's sick, and we give him certain rights, but there's a chance he's going to recover. A goses is literally on his deathbed, and he's literally about to die. And so therefore, the Rashbam quotes the Mesechas Smachos that states a goses is like somebody's alive, and he's able to inherit. And therefore, Wahanu Nechasim, the Rashbam says, Itzrach Yakir Sheyitol Be'en HaBechor Pishnayim. And for these assets that he would get while he is a goses, that he'd want to give, that he says, this is my firstborn, this is what the word Yakir helps, to give the firstborn a double portion in those. Because here there's no migu, because even according to Rabbi Meir, it says a person can give over something that's not yet in existence. That is only the case when he has the ability to give them to others. But this goses, he can't speak, and he has no ability to give it. And so therefore, he couldn't be able to give it to others, any assets that he got while he's a goses. And so therefore, we need the pasuk to tell us that if he gave away assets that he got while he was a goses, then, or if he said this chazaka, if he said this person was the firstborn and then he got assets while he was a goses, we believe him that it goes to the firstborn, the double portion. So the Gemara says, or a mayor de amar adam makne davar shlobo olam yakir lamali. So according to Rabbi Meir, so I skipped it. I went straight to the position of Rabbi Meir. So according to the position, the Chasam, that if he says Yakir, it also works for the assets that he didn't have at his possession at that time. We say that he gave them away because he couldn't have given away before. And according to Meir, it says, Meir says a person can give away something that's not yet in existence. What does he do with the word Yakir? If something that fell to him while he is a Goseis, then the word Yakir helps to say that the firstborn gets a double portion of that. Tanarabana, so the Gemara now goes back a little bit. That's why I present the status that he's a Bechor. Amar Aviv al Acher Shu Bechor, and the father comes along and challenges that Chazakin says somebody else is the firstborn. Neman, we're going to believe the father, but are you Muchzakin Bo She'ena Bechor? But if we know somebody is not a firstborn, we have a presumptive status. And so, but the father says he is a firstborn, he's not believed. So the Gemara explains the Reisha is Rebbe Yehuda. The first cause of this brisa that says that if he's a firstborn and the father says about another person that he's a firstborn, he's believed. That's Rebbe Yehuda says we believe the father. But the Seifa, which says that we do the Seifa, which says we believe the father to say that we don't believe the father to say he's the firstborn. That is the position of the Rabbanan. The Seifa Rabbanan. The Gemara says, Amar Rabbi Yochanan, Amar Benihu. Let's say a person says, this man is my son. V'chazar v'amar Avdi. But then he comes back and says, actually, he's my slave. Eino Neman. He's not going to be believed because since the Torah believes him to say that he's my son, then we're not going, both according to the Rebbe and the Rabbanan, the Torah believes him, Rabbanan in a limited manner, we're not going to believe him to contradict his words and say he's not his son. Because since he said testimony, he can't go back and say it and reverse it. But let's say he says, Avdihu, v'chazar v'amar benihu. Let's say he says he is my slave, and then he comes back and says he is my son. Neman, we're going to believe him. He says, Avdihu, he says he's my slave. And then he says he's my son. We believe him. Why? Because the Eved doesn't mean a slave here. It means just like a helper. The Mishamesh li ka'avda, ka'amar. Because it just means that he's serving me like an Eved. He's just helping me like an Eved. And it's the opposite about a taxes. Let's say he's walking past the tax office, and he says he's my son. And then later on he says he's my slave. Then we're going to believe him, Neman, because a person doesn't want to tell a tax collector he has a lot of slaves. They're going to raise the taxes on him. But Amar Avdi, but when he's walking past the tax office, he says, this is my slave. And then he goes back and says, you know what, he's my son. Eino Neman. Then we're not going to believe him because you would have told the tax collector he's your son, not that he's your slave. So the Gemara says, Amar Rav Nachman bar Yitzchak. So excuse me, we skipped a bright. So the Gemara brings a contradiction. Meisvei, Hayim Mishamsho Kaben, Ba V'Amar Beniyu, V'Chazar V'Amar Avdiyu, Eino Neman. So we have a brisa that says that if he was serving him like his son, and he comes along and he says he's my son, and then he says he's my slave, we don't believe him. But Hayim Mishamsho Ke'eved, Uba V'Amar Avdiyu, V'Chazar V'Amar Beniyu, Eino Neman. He says if he's working for him like his Eved, he says he's my slave, and then he says he's my son, we don't believe him. And that contradicts what Rabbi Yochanan says at the beginning, that if he says he's my slave and then he says my son, we believe him because he was serving him like a slave. But according to this brisa, it says that if he says he's his slave, and then he says he's my son, we don't believe him. So how do we deal with this? Amar Rav Nachman bar Yitzchak, Hasam dekarle avdi meitzer meya. No, where do we say we don't believe him? Where he doesn't just say he's my slave and then he says my son. He says he is my slave, meitzer meya. That at first he called him my slave. That basically meitzer meya. What is meitzer meya? In my meitzer meya, the Gemara says meitzer abda meya zuzi. This slave is worth 100 zuz. And a person wouldn't speak that way about his son, even if he's serving him like an Eved. You wouldn't speak that way about about your son. And so therefore we believe that such a person was not his son, and we don't believe him if he first said he was his Eved, and afterwards he says he's his son. Okay, so we'll stop here. This is today's Daf Yomi, a beautiful Daf, and have a great day.